Trying to get smart on a complex topic, wading through source material, these dense frameworks, it can feel like standing at the foot of a mountain.
I look at
The
everything.
knowledge is up there, but like, how do you actually get to the important bits without getting totally lost?
Yeah, information overload is a real challenge. You
Yeah.
kind of need a guide, maybe a shortcut to the essential insights, something that cuts through all the noise and gets right to the core.
And that's exactly our mission here with the deep dive. We take the sources you're interested in, the research, the frameworks, maybe even your own notes, and we act as your navigators.
Hmm.
We'll help you pull out the really important knowledge, understand what it means, and, see why it's relevant to you. Think of us as your personal guides on this learning journey.
Our goal is really just to help you become well-informed efficiently and hopefully enjoyably.
So today we're taking a deep dive into a pretty foundational document in the world of information and technology governance, the COBIT 2019 framework. Our source material is the official COBIT 2019 Framework Governance and Management Objectives PDF. And we're not just dipping our toes in, we're starting right at the beginning of Chapter 4. We're focusing on the very first governance objective the framework lays out.
That's correct. And, for anyone new to COBIT or maybe just needing a quick refresher, the core model, which is shown early in the document, it divides INT activities into two main areas, governance and management.
Okay.
Governance is about evaluate, direct, and monitor.
Right.
That's really the board-level activity.
Right.
Management is more about, planning, building, running, and checking things.
Got it.
Chapter 4 of this document details all 40 specific governance and management objectives within this structure. And like you said, we're starting with number 1.
Right, the absolute bedrock. Let's get right to it then. What is this first objective actually called?
So the very first governance objective in Chapter 4 is EDM-01. Its full title is Ensured Governance Framework Setting and Maintenance.
Ensured governance framework setting and maintenance. Okay, so for you listening, picture this. Before an organization can really govern its IT effectively, make strategic decisions, manage risks, ensure value, it first needs a system, like a structure, maybe a blueprint for that governance itself.
Exactly.
This objective, EDM-01, it's all about getting that fundamental system in place and making sure it stays relevant and healthy over time.
Yeah.
It's really setting the stage for everything else that follows.
Yeah, precisely. The source really highlights that achieving EDM-01 is fundamental to hitting primary enterprise goals and INT-related goals. It's not just like an IT thing.
Oh.
It's seen as critical for the whole business. And importantly, the framework places the ultimate responsibility for this objective squarely with the board of directors.
With the board. Okay.
Yeah, it's their job to ensure this governance framework actually exists and is functional.
So the board isn't necessarily doing all the day-to-day IT governance stuff, but they are responsible for making sure the system for doing it is there and, working. Got it. Now, the framework doesn't just give you the objective name. It details how you achieve it, right? It breaks it down into specific practices. What are those?
Right. The practices for EDM-01, they follow that core governance cycle we just mentioned. Evaluate, direct, and monitor.
Okay.
And this really reflects the board's role. They evaluate the current state and the options. They direct decisions and policies, and they monitor the outcomes and performance of the governance system itself.
Let's unpack that first practice then. EDM 01.01, evaluate the governance system. When the framework talks about evaluating the governance system here, what's the core idea?
The core idea is really assessing how well the current INT governance system is performing and whether it's truly effective in guiding the organization's INT. It's like a structured checkup.
A checkup. And what kinds of things does the framework suggest you look at during this evaluation? Like, what are the key activities involved?
Well, instead of listing every single activity, maybe let's think about the types of things you're doing. You're assessing if the right people have the delegated authority and if they're doing their job effectively when it comes to INT governance.
Okay, people first.
Yeah. And you're periodically checking if the formal governance mechanisms, things like committees, policies, processes, are actually set up and working the way they're supposed to.
The machinery, got it.
Right. You're also looking at the overall design of your governance system to maybe identify any weaknesses or areas for improvement. And a pretty significant part involves overseeing compliance.
Ah, compliance.
Yeah, checking that INT usage meets legal obligations, contracts, internal policies, and also making sure the organization's system of controls is effective.
So it's making sure the structure is sound, the people are doing their part, and, things are above board legally and policy-wise. If you're doing this evaluation, how do you know if you're doing it well, or what the results of your evaluation actually mean? What kind of metrics does the source suggest tracking?
The framework offers some example metrics that give you pretty concrete ways to measure. Things like how quickly key decisions are being made compared to a target time.
Ah, speed of decisions.
Exactly, because slow decisions can indicate governance bottlenecks, right?
Yeah.
Also, the frequency of independent reviews of the governance system itself doesn't get enough scrutiny.
Hmm.
They also suggest measuring stakeholder satisfaction through surveys. Are the people affected by INT governance actually happy with how it works?
Right. Do people like it?
Yeah. And simply tracking the number of INT governance issues being reported can show you where problems might be, bubbling up.
Those sound like really practical ways to see if the foundation is solid or maybe cracking a bit. The source also mentions inputs feeding into this evaluation practice and outputs coming out of it, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. So, for example, inputs would include things like the enterprise's high-level governance principles or its defined decision-making model you evaluate against these.
Mm.
And the outputs could be things like identified priority governance objectives that need attention based on your assessment.
Okay, that makes sense. That's the evaluate piece, understanding where things stand. The next practice under EDM-01 is direct the governance system. That's EDM-01.02. What's the focus here?
So directing is about translating the insights you got from the evaluation into actual guidance. It's about setting the course, making the decisions, and ensuring the organization follows the principles and policies that the governance body, usually the board, has established.
And what kind of activities does the framework describe for this direction setting?
Well, key activities involve making sure leaders throughout the organization understand and actually support the INT governance principles, getting that crucial buy-in.
Buy-in is key.
Totally. It's also about guiding how the organization sets up its INT structures, processes, and practices so they align with the agreed-upon governance principles and, the authority levels. Think of it as translating the strategic direction into actionable guidance for everyone involved in INT.
Okay, so evaluation tells you what's happening. Directing tells everyone what should be happening and how to get there. How can you measure if this direction is actually sticking? Is it working?
Yeah, good question. The source provides a metric like the degree to which agreed-on INT governance principles are evident in processes and practices.
How do you measure that?
Often it's measured as a percentage, like what percentage of your INT processes can you trace back to the core governance principles you've directed. It shows if the direction is actually influencing behavior on the ground.
Ah, that's a smart way to see if the guidance is filtering down. And inputs and outputs for directing, similar idea.
Yep. Inputs would again include those high-level governance principles and defined authority levels. Outputs might include documented guiding principles for things like how resources and capabilities should be allocated for INT.
All right, evaluate to check the state, direct to set the path. The third and final practice for EDM-01 is monitor the governance system, EDM-01.03. What does monitoring focus on in this context?
Monitoring is really the oversight function. It's about continuously observing and tracking the effectiveness and performance of the governance system you've put in place and directed. Are things working as intended? Are we staying on track?
And what does the framework suggest you monitor specifically? What activities are involved there?
The monitoring activities largely focus on ensuring ongoing compliance, checking that the use of INT continues to meet relevant obligations and internal policies.
Okay, more compliance.
Yeah, it's maintaining oversight over whether INT is satisfying all those legal, regulatory, and policy requirements. It also involves overseeing the effectiveness and the compliance of the enterprise's overall system of controls related to INT.
Okay, so evaluating is like a periodic checkup, directing is giving the orders, and monitoring is keeping a constant eye on things to ensure they stay compliant and effective. How do you measure the success of this monitoring effort?
The source offers metrics here too, like the percent of INT investments traceable to enterprise strategy.
Ah, connecting IT spend to the big picture.
Exactly. This tells you if your IT spending is actually aligned with the business's high-level goals, which is a really key outcome of effective governance.
Yeah.
Another one is the percent of INT initiatives in the overall portfolio in which value is managed through the full life cycle. So, ensuring that IT projects aren't just delivered, but they actually deliver and maintain value over time.
Those metrics really show that monitoring isn't just about ticking boxes. It's about making sure INT activities are strategically relevant and actually deliver value. What about inputs and outputs for monitor?
Inputs here might be things like results from assurance reviews or audits that information feeds into the monitoring process.
Okay.
And outputs could include assessments of how effective the reporting on governance performance actually is.
Okay, so to achieve EDM01, ensured governance framework setting and maintenance, you evaluate the current system, you direct its path forward, and you monitor its performance and compliance. That makes a lot of sense as a cycle. But the framework also emphasizes that governance isn't just about processes. It relies on other elements, too. It calls these components, right?
That's a really crucial insight from COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah. The governance objective isn't achieved in a vacuum just by processes alone. It requires various enablers, or components as they call them, to be in place.
Right.
And for EDM01, the source specifically highlights relevant aspects of three key components: people, skills, and competencies; principles, policies, and procedures; and culture, ethics, and behavior.
Okay, let's look at people first. What skills does the framework say are important for getting this whole governance framework set up right?
So under component D, which is people, skills, and competencies, the source points specifically to skills in enterprise governance of INT and just IT governance.
Makes sense.
Yeah, you need people who actually understand these concepts and know how to apply them at a strategic enterprise level to build and maintain this framework effectively.
Absolutely, you need skilled people.
Okay.
How about the formal guidance? Principles, policies, and procedures. That's component G. What kind of policy is key for EDM01?
The framework describes a specific governance policy here, and the description it gives us provides a key insight into its purpose. It provides the guiding principles.
Yeah, the philosophy behind it.
Exactly. It states things like, INT governance being critical to enterprise success, the need for INT and the business to align strategically, and that business requirements should drive IT priorities. It also emphasizes that enforcement of governance rules must be fair and consistent, and that relevant industry best practices and frameworks should be considered.
So this policy isn't just a list of rules, it's the guiding philosophy, stating why governance matters and what core beliefs should underpin the whole thing.
Precisely. And the description for this policy adds another really critical point. It must reflect a process of continual improvement.
Continual improvement, okay.
And it must be tailored, maintained, and updated to ensure relevance. Governance isn't a one-time setup. It has to be dynamic.
That feels like a huge point, especially with how fast things change. And finally, component F, culture, ethics, and behavior. What kind of organizational culture is needed for EDM01 to actually succeed?
Well, the source lists what it calls key culture elements that really echo the policy principles we just talked about.
Okay.
It reinforces that the organizational culture itself must recognize that INT governance is critical to enterprise success. The culture should naturally drive priorities based on business needs and benefits. It should support equitable and consistent enforcement of governance decisions and encourage the assessment and adoption of relevant best practices.
So the culture needs to inherently value and support the principles laid out in the policy and the objective itself. It's not just having a policy document somewhere, it's about living it.
Precisely. These components, the skilled people, the guiding policy, and that supportive culture, they are fundamental enablers that allow the evaluate, direct, and monitor practices for EDM01 to actually function effectively.
All right, so we've taken a pretty detailed look at EDM01, the very first governance objective in the COVID 2019 framework. We've explored its practices, evaluate, direct, monitor, and the crucial components that support it. But you might be asking, okay, I get the breakdown, but why is knowing all this detail important for me?
Well, this objective, EDM01, it's the absolute starting line for effective INT governance in any organization using this framework, or really any organization trying to be intentional about its IT governance.
Right.
Understanding it gives you the foundational knowledge of how the top level, the board usually, is supposed to establish and maintain the entire system for managing and controlling IT. It shows you the blueprint for the whole governance layer.
Yeah, it's like understanding how a house's foundation is laid before you start worrying about the plumbing or the wiring inside.
Yeah.
Knowing these practices and components helps you see the underlying structure behind sound digital operations and why the board's role here is so critical. If you're involved in any aspect of IT or business where governance matters, understanding this starting point really helps you see where everything else flows from.
It provides context for why other IT management processes and controls exist. Often it's because the governance layer, which is initiated and overseen via EDM01, has directed their need and their implementation.
Okay, so in this deep dive, we've unpacked EDM01, ensured governance framework setting and maintenance right from the COVID 2019 source. We've looked at its core, evaluate, direct, and monitor practices, highlighting the types of activities and the meaning of the metrics involved, and explored how essential components like the governance policy and the organizational culture enable this foundation.
And understanding this isn't just, theoretical knowledge. It's about grasping the fundamental mechanism by which an organization ensures its INT supports enterprise goals, manages risk effectively, and ultimately delivers value. This foundation is really key to making sense of many IT management activities you'll likely encounter.
So, to wrap up with a thought drawn directly from the source's description of that governance policy, it states this policy must be tailored, maintained, and updated to ensure relevance.
Hmm.
Consider this. In our rapidly changing world of technology, business models, emerging risks, what does that concept of continual improvement, not just of the IT, but of the governance framework itself, what does that truly demand from an organization's leadership and its culture to actually remain effective?
That's a significant challenge. It really requires ongoing attention right at the highest level.
Yeah, definitely something worth thinking about.